Okay guys, hello, and this is lesson 2.2 A for input and output tables. So today what we're going to be doing is we are going to finish input-output tables by substituting x into the rule. We won't always be given the rule, so sometimes we're going to have to figure out what the rule is and then plug in x. Okay. So let's take a look at this first input-output table. This is actually more like a function table. Okay. And what that means is over here I have my x, okay? I have my x, and I have all my x values. Here I have a rule, y equals 4x. What I need to do is I need to plug in x into my rule to figure out what y is going to equal. Okay? So let's take a look at this. So if I have x equals -2, really I'm going to make a substitution. I have y equals 4 times x, and I'm going to substitute -2 in for x. Okay, so what I did is I just took -2 and plugged it in for x into my rule. So y equals 4 times -2. And so when I solve, y is going to be equal to -8. And that's it. That's the process that I'm going to do for every single one of these values for x. Okay, so for -1, y equals 4 times -1, which is just -4. If I were to plug in 0, y equals 4 times 0. 4 times 0, that's just 0. If I plug in 1, y equals 4 times 1, which is 4. And I'm going to finish this table out. Y equals 4 times 2, which is 8. And lastly, y equals 4 times 5, which is 20. Okay? So I have now figured out all of my values for y in this input-output table. It is complete. Okay? Notice at the beginning, when we're counting by ones with x, when we're just moving up by 1, so -2 to -1 to 0 to 1 to 2, we're just counting by ones. Notice the pattern. Okay? Because my rule is 4 times x, I'm counting by 4s over here on the right-hand side. Okay? I'm counting 4s for my y. So I have -8. If I add 4, I get -4. If I add 4, I get 0. If I add 4, I get 4. If I add 4, I get 8. But be careful. Don't just get into the habit of just counting, because then look, we have this 5 right here, and that's after 2. If we were to still count by 1, this would have been a 3, but instead it's a 5. So we still have to make sure we plug it into the rule and that it all makes sense. Okay? Okay, so let's take a look at another problem. And this one's set up a little bit differently, though. And this is what we're going to see a little bit more throughout from here on out. Is we have an x and y table, so we have an input-output table. But now I'm missing a few x values, and I'm given some of my y values, and I don't know what my rule is. Okay? So because of that, what we need to do is we need to look at the relationship between x and y and figure out kind of what's happening when we're given both values. And then we can write our rule and then complete the table with the rule. Okay? So let's take a look. If I have x equals -3 and y equals 15, we want to think kind of what can we do to -3 to make it equal 15? Can we divide? Can we multiply? What can we do? And the first thing that comes to my mind when I'm looking at this is I know I can multiply, because 3 times 5 is 15. So for right here, it could possibly be, this is just me estimating right now, but let's look at the possibility of y equals, let's say, because x is -3 times -5, because -3 times -5 is positive 15. Okay? So what I did is I plugged in -3 for x right here. And I'm multiplying it by -5. So I'm thinking there's a possibility that my rule may be y equals -5 times x. Okay? But I want to make sure that this holds true with the other values that I have. So let's take a look at this second one right here. If I believe that it's the rule of y equals -5 times x, let's plug that in right here. Y equals -5 times my x is negative 2. So y equals negative 5 times negative 2, and that's going to be a positive because a negative times a negative is a positive 10. And look, positive 10 is what's already filled out for my y. So we just figured out the rule by figuring out what was happening in relationship between x and y and our first two values of our table. So now that we know that our rule is y equals negative 5 times x, here, let me fix that a negative 5 right there. That does not look good. Okay. So now we can just use that rule to plug in everything else. Okay, and to fill out the rest of the table. So if I had y equals negative 5x for this one, I'll just have y equals negative 5 times negative 1, which is positive 5, and I can fill that out in this part of the table. Okay, 0 is already filled out for us, and it does make sense, okay, because y equals negative 5 times 0 would just be 0, okay. Now we got to figure out, we kind of got to work backwards here, okay. So I have negative 5. What times negative 5 is going to equal negative 5? That's what I have to ask myself. What times negative 5 is going to equal negative 5? Okay, and the answer to that is just going to be positive 1. Positive 1, because if I were to plug that in, y equals negative 5 times 1. And negative 5 times 1 is negative 5, and that's what I was trying to figure out. Okay, so it's almost like now we're kind of dividing by 5, right? So now let's take a look then. If we're dividing by 5, let's take a look over at y equals negative 20. Okay, what we can do is we have to ask ourselves, negative 5 times what equals negative 20? So let's write it out actually as the equation. Negative 20 equals negative 5 times x. So I'm trying to figure out negative 5 times what is going to equal negative 20. Okay, so really what I'm going to be doing in the end is I'm dividing by 5. Okay, I'm really doing negative 20 divided by negative 5. Okay, and negative 20 divided by negative 5, 5 times 4 equals 20. So it's just going to be positive 4, because a negative divided by a negative is always positive. So it's positive 4. Last one, y equals negative 5x, that's our rule. We're given our x, we can just plug that in. Y equals negative 5 times 6, and that's just going to be negative 30. Okay guys, let's take a look at one last table. Okay, and again, it's very similar to the last table we just saw. We have the x and y input-output table. We're given a bunch of different values for x, a bunch of values for y, and we have to figure out what the rule is, and then we can complete the table. So I want to take a look at my relationship between x and y. Okay, and I want to look at x first. So x is negative 4, and if I plug in x to some rule, I'm going to get negative 2 for y. So I want to figure out what possible things can I do to negative 4 to get negative 2. The first thing that comes to my mind is that I can take x and I can divide it by 2. Okay, because if I divide x by 2 and I plug in negative 4, so negative 4 divided by 2, 4 divided by 2 is just 2, okay, and it's going to be negative because I have a negative divided by a positive. Whenever you divide different signs, it's always negative. Okay, so that's a possibility. So let's write it up here in the rule. A possibility for the rule is y equals x divided by 2. Okay, so let's see if this holds true for the next x and y values that I'm given. Okay, so if I were to plug it in, negative 2, y equals negative 2 divided by 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is just 1, and again my answer has to be negative because I have a negative divided by a positive. So that would hold true, okay, because again y equals negative 1 when x equals negative 2, so my guess, my theory was correct. Y equals x divided by 2, that is our rule. Okay, so here's our rule right here. We have it figured out, now we can use that for the rest of our problems. Okay, so let's plug it in. y equals 0 divided by 2, which is just 0. Just to check to make sure that our rule still works, y equals 2 divided by 2, that should be 1, and 1's what I have here, so that worked out perfect. Okay, now I kind of got to work backwards. I'm given my y, and I need to figure out what x is. Okay, so I need to figure out what divided by 2 is going to equal to 2. Okay, this is where we're actually kind of multiplying. Okay, and I'm actually going to multiply my y by whatever my rule is, and that's how I'm going to figure it out. So I'm actually going to do 2 times 2, which is just 4. Okay, and that makes sense because 4 divided by 2 equals 2. Okay, and I need to do the same thing right here. I need to figure out what divided by 2 is equal to 5. Okay, so what divided by 2 equals 5? So what is doubled? What is 5 doubled? And that would be 10. Okay, and lastly, y equals 14 divided by 2. Y is going to be equal to 7 for the last part of that table. Okay, and that's it for input-output tables, you guys. And I hope this video helped, and we'll move on to the next one for 2.2 video B after this.